Hello everyone, welcome to our second training video in Ecclesiastes, Chasing the Wind, Living for Eternity in a Temporary World. And the question we're going to explore is what is lasting in work? This idea that he explores throughout the book, I work to gain wealth, to gain pleasure, because these are all interlinked. Work, wealth, pleasure. And we need to keep in mind when we look at the context of this book, that this is the overarching question. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under heaven or under the sun? And of course here, the question is, what is worth working for? What can I gain through my work or pleasure or wealth? And of course, the backdrop of this is the problem, which was created by Genesis chapter 3, is human brevity, the march of time, which robs us of things to be permanent, and in the end, our inevitable death. These themes run throughout the book. And so do we gain anything if this is true? And it is true. Now, importantly, one of the things I've noticed in study 1 and 2 is that people want to quickly get out of Ecclesiastes or disagree with Ecclesiastes and just jump to the gospel and saying, look, I don't agree with the teacher. But we need to keep in mind the teacher's words, what they are for. The words of the wise, he says, are like goads and like nails firmly fixed. The two ideas here, of course, the goads, he's trying to prod you in the right direction. So if you don't heed his warnings and words, then you might just pursue an avenue you should never be living for and try and find gain in an area you shouldn't be. So realize what he's doing. It's painful, yeah, but the goading puts you into the right direction. So please listen to him. And nails firmly fixed, meaning a good solid foundation, and then very importantly, they are given by one shepherd. These words aren't his words, they're from God. Otherwise it wouldn't be in the canon. So please don't dismiss him. Actually listen and feel the prod of the goads and how he's prodding you to have a firmer foundation. Of course, the book itself, the conclusion, fear God, keep his commandments, it links with Proverbs and the rest of the Old Testament, but it's not the fullness of the answer, of course. The fullness of the answer is found in Jesus. However, you won't appreciate the wonder of the gospel and what Jesus actually come to change and how we can live for him if you don't understand the problem. So don't avoid the problem. Sometimes you got to sit in the doctor's office and hear the diagnosis in all its details before we can move on to the prognosis. Don't rush. Take your time. Experience the pain of the goads. Look for a firmer foundation. Know it's from God. And ultimately, every study will land in Jesus. So don't rush it. And don't dismiss what the teacher is saying. It's real. It's true. But moving along, let's look at what the teacher is exploring. And he kicks off here after wisdom. Wisdom and work is sort of interwoven. Wisdom, work, wealth, and pleasure. And again, he says, I said in my heart, come now. Again, remember the parameters, this wisdom he's talking about. It's not the wisdom of Proverbs. The things he's exploring here, Proverbs would never agree with, or the law of God wouldn't. It's just human wisdom as defined by us, life under the sun. But with that wisdom, he's like, come now, I will test you with pleasure and enjoy yourself. So let's see if there's any gain. And he just gives his conclusions. It's breath, laughter, a form of enjoyment. It's just madness. Pleasure, well, what use is it? And then he says, basically, I search with my heart how to cheer my body with wine and, of course, folly. People find pleasure and enjoyment through these things. Because he's trying to see that I might see what was good for children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. Remember, we're brief, we're hevel, we're breath, like vapor. And so he realizes, look, there's not much to gain here. And then from here he jumps towards wealth, because they're interlinked, and you'll see that. Wealth and work, right? So he tells us, look, I made great works. I built houses, planted vineyards, gardens, parks, pools to water those vineyards, and forests and growing trees. He made all these things. So he labored incredibly hard. And of course, through his labors and beautiful works, he's got wealth. And so look at what he's buying. I bought male and female slaves, great possessions. I also gathered silver and gold and treasures of kings. Look at the pleasure here. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines. Thou sons of man. So look what I did with all. I built great works. I gained great wealth. I used my wealth for pleasure. And notice what I've done, he says, I've become great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Now, funny enough, people think this dismisses that it could be Solomon, because they argue, Only David was before Solomon. But people forget that the city of Jerusalem is far older than David and Solomon. Many Canaanites ruled Jerusalem, even though it wasn't called Jerusalem. So you can include them into that list as well. Jerusalem didn't start with David. It existed before David. He conquered Jerusalem. So yeah, he could say this. And again, he reminds us, remember, wisdom remained with me. I'm using my method. And he points to desire again, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. So he's pointing out, look, I'm really exploring pleasure. I kept my heart from no pleasure. For my heart found pleasure in all my toil. And he would argue that this pleasure, that's the reward. The things I built and bought and used my money to enjoy, that's my reward for my toil. And then he pauses. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, just like before, that red there, vanity, he concludes, all was vanity, and a striving after the wind. All was like a breath vapor, it just vanishes. It's enigmatic, it's transient, and it's like shepherding the wind, you can't control it. And in the end, well, I didn't gain anything. Maybe some temporary breath-like things, but permanence? No. And then he moves to wisdom, where he highlights the problem why this is the case. He already alluded to it. We've got few days. With the wisdom section, which happens here from verse 12, he points out, well, death sort of undercuts it. And then with work, he points this out as well. So, and when he picks up at work again, he makes the same conclusion sort of wisdom. I hated. It really made him loathe all my toil in which I toil under the sun. And notice why. Because when you die, there's something that happens to everything you worked for, all the wealth and things you built and the pleasures you accumulated. Here's the problem when you die. I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And here's the problem. Who knows whether he will be a wise or a fool? You don't know. The person who inherits what you've got. You know, when people say, I'm building for the future generation. Do you have any idea whether the future generation will use what you built up wisely or foolishly? He says, yet he will be the master for which all I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. He says, look, this is breath. And how relevant is Solomon's life? Because when Solomon died, his son Rehoboam inherited everything. And what did Rehoboam do? He was a foolish king. And through his folly, he destroyed the kingdom of Israel. All his father's wealth was ransacked by other nations. It was lost. So no wonder this was a point of grief. So he says, so I turned about and gave my heart up to despair. Because when you think about it, you've got no control about how the next generation will spend or use what you built. And so he despairs of all the toil my labors under the sun, because sometimes, like he says, a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill like Solomon did, must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. And they might just squander it. This also is vanity and a great evil. Breath and a great evil. See how the tentacles of Genesis 3 just ruin everything. For what has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun, for all these days are full of sorrow? Because remember, work is hard. That's what Genesis 3 tells us. It's filled with vexation, very little rest sometimes, and just for brief moments of enjoyment. You can see the problem. And of course, then the question is, what's the solution? Now, the teacher gives us one answer, and it's an important answer. It's a true answer, and we'll see how the Apostle Paul affirms this answer. There was nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. So he's not negating the fact, hey, through your work you get stuff to eat, drink, basically sustenance and enjoyment. And those aren't bad things. This also I saw, it's actually from God. It's from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat and who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. So, notice, it's not bad. But if you had to put it with what we've just learned, you can't work and build things up thinking that you can keep it So if you try and grip it hard, live life with a tight fist, you'll be bitterly disappointed like the teacher. You will end in despair. But what you have at this moment, you eat, drink, and enjoy, but with an open hand, knowing that you will lose it in the end, you actually find a sense of basically peace about the whole situation and enjoying what you've got at the moment as a gift from God, not something to keep, but something to enjoy for now. And notice again, there's a little thread here, of course, of Proverbs. But to the sinner he has given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to the one who pleases God. So even affirming here the paradigm of Proverbs. And so don't despise the fact that you eat and drink and enjoy things that you work for. It's a gift. But enjoy the gift with an open hand, not a closed hand, because you will lose it with death. And when we move to the New Testament, this becomes even clearer, and the fullness of the answer of what we need is there. Because the teacher doesn't explore it further than just saying, look, it's a gift from God, enjoy it with an open hand. But Paul says, hey, actually Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, Paul reiterates it in 1 Timothy chapter 6, that you can work for things that have eternal value. So let's look at it. So 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6 to 10. Notice what Paul says, in this life, two things. There are two things you really need that will give you great gain. Godliness, which is really Christ-likeness, following Jesus, his pattern of life. And tied to that is contentment with where you are at, as you live a life trying to imitate, honor, and follow Jesus. That's great gain. And here he affirms what the teacher has been saying. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. So again, it's not like you can keep it. So, but if we have food and clothing, affirming what the teacher says, with these things we will be content. There's your gain. But notice affirming that if you try and follow that route of work, wealth, and pleasure as the end goal, it's a really bad route. He's affirming what the teacher says, but those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires, which we saw the teacher explores, and in the end, that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. It's through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. It ends with despair, sorrow, ruin, destruction. Just like the teacher, don't do it. You pursue Christ-likeness and contentment. However, that doesn't mean you have to be poor, because there are Christians and people who follow Jesus and who work well and have a great Christian ethic, who have great success in their work and also accumulate lots of wealth. What are they supposed to do with it? And so Paul says, as for the rich in this present age, who are Christians who follow Jesus and want to follow him, charge them, A, not to be haughty. Why? It's from God, remember? It's a gift. He gave it to you. Nor set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches. You're going to lose it in the end. So don't put your hope on it. No, put your hope on the one who gave it to you in the first place and who is everlasting, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. So again, affirming what the teacher says. What you've got is given to you to enjoy, but it's from God. And there's a way how you can use this wealth that you've got and enjoy that actually glorifies God, that you can sort of invest into the kingdom, or to use Jesus' words, store up treasures in heaven. And this is what you need to do. Very important. They are to do good. To be rich in good works, you have to read the whole letter of Timothy in the New Testament and Jesus' words and Sermon on the Mount to see what all these good works are. And to be generous and ready to share. This is how you imitate Christ with your wealth, which Paul later on, for example, in 2 Corinthians point out, though he was rich, he became poor for your sakes, so that you, by his poverty, might become rich. Imitate him by being generous, ready to share. And so thus storing up treasures for themselves as a good foundation for the future. Notice this treasure idea, which Jesus talks about, the Sermon on the Mount, treasure in heaven, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. Real life. Everlasting life. So Paul's saying, hey, yes, your riches are from God, who provides it for you for your enjoyment, but use it in a way that has everlasting value. By using it to do good, be rich in good works, be generous, ready to share. Good works as defined by the gospel of Christ, not how you define it, how Jesus defines it. For His kingdom, to be salt and light for Him. And in this way, you'll store up treasures for yourselves in heaven. You're investing in eternity, real life. Not this current status of this world, but the one to come that God's going to recreate, renew when Jesus returns. Don't you want to live for that one? And so what we want people to walk away with is realize that work, wealth, and pleasure, they're temporary. And so center our lives on the lasting work of believing in Jesus, and how our faith in Jesus transforms us to actually live now for eternity. And that's what we want people to walk away with in this study.